Why is Ukraine turning into a graveyard for Russian tanks? There's no doubt that over the last 6 months, we've all been seeing Ukraine living their day to day lives, and in the background, you see a Russian tank here and there just absolutely destroyed. For a lot of Ukrainian cities, they used to look majestic and stunning. Since Russia's invasion, the word to describe them is more like apocalyptic. Citizens of Ukraine have reported being tortured by the Russians, with examples being shocked by bare wires. Undoubtedly, the Russians have been doing awful things, and mass graves have been a repeated pattern, with more and more being found as the Russian troops are starting to retreat. The Washington Post wrote, Ukrainian troops have documented war machines in various states, from combat-ready tanks to vehicles in need of repair. In some cases, Ukrainian forces have obliterated Russian weapons, leaving smoldering vehicles to be discovered by the advancing forces. Russia brought in a bunch of tanks into Ukraine thinking they'd be able to steamroll them in a couple of days. I'll be honest, I didn't think Ukraine would be able to put up this big of a fight at first. But across Ukraine today, there's tanks scattered all across the country. Now, some of these tanks were in pretty decent condition and weren't totally destroyed before the Russians abandoned them. When the Russians started to retreat, the smell of Ukrainian and Russian bodies decaying in the streets is just unbearable. And to make matters worse, it's reported that stray dogs were chomping on at least two of these bodies in the streets. Russia has lost a lot during their attempt to take over Ukraine. Not only have they lost a considerable amount of Russian lives, but they've also lost a lot of expensive equipment. Just to give you an idea, during the beginning days of Russia's invasion, it was estimated that they were losing 5 tanks per day. Then, when Ukraine started pushing back, it's estimated that Russia started losing more, around 10 tanks a day. Russia has gotten to the point where its resources are so depleted that they're using tanks from the 60s and 70s that are getting wrecked on the battlefields. 10 tanks a day adds up quick. It's hard to say exactly how many tanks have been totally taken out of action when Ukraine is able to take some of the tanks and use them themselves with Ukrainian ammo. But it is estimated that as of December 2022, over 2,500 Russian tanks have been destroyed. Oof. Get this, over 6% of the casualties of Russia in this war are of tank crew members. Imagine being locked in a metal container as it's lit on fire. Doesn't that just sound like an awful way to die? Being cooked alive inside of a metal box? Numerous reports suggest Russia has around 12,000 to 12,500 tanks and around 30,000 armored vehicles in storage. So, why is it that Russian tanks are starting to litter the country of Ukraine? I know earlier I said that some of the tanks being used by Russia are from the 60s. However, just because some of the tanks are older doesn't mean that's why they're being lost like crazy. You see, tanks are supposed to be used with other forces such as other armored vehicles and troops to help defend tanks against anti-tank missiles. But as we've seen over the months, Russian tank crews are being abandoned and picked apart one by one. Another thing to consider is how many billions of dollars have been sent to Ukraine to help them in their defense efforts against Russia. The US alone has sent over $50 billion. In total, Ukraine has received over $100 billion in aid. The US has sent hundreds of Javelin anti-armor systems that cost $250,000 each. Yes, this is the launcher so many of us have seen in Call of Duty and Battlefield, where the rocket shoots out, it goes up, and then it comes down on top of the tank or target. The US and other Western countries are using Ukraine to fight a proxy war with Russia, and they're supplying them with these modern-day anti-tank missiles. If you're a 22-year-old Russian, you're not going to want to risk being burned alive in a tank when instead you could be at home with your bros playing Counter-Strike. Would you want to be in a tank with no other troops around you being fired upon by $50 billion worth of the most destructive weapons created by the world's strongest military, aka the United States military? I can't blame them for abandoning their tanks. The Russians have absolutely botched this invasion and looks like they're not going to be doing so great. Now, I know what you're thinking. Can't the Russians have a way to defend against these shoulder-fired anti-tank missiles? The easy answer is yes, they should have a way. Russians should be equipped with ERA, explosive reactive armor or active armor, to defend against incoming missiles and projectiles. Russia has the know-how to defend against incoming threats and missiles, so what's going on? The reason Russia doesn't have these systems in place is because they didn't have proper processes or trainings in place to teach their troops how to work or maintain the systems. But there are different types of ERA, and some are better performing than others at protecting the tank from incoming threats. Even if the tanks have ERA, there's still a chance that a strike is deadly to the crew inside. And to add salt to injury, Russian tanks armor is 8 times worse than NATO tanks armor. Russian troops' poor mentality combined with poor equipment does not have Russian troops trying to fight very hard for the motherland, and it's resulting in Russia losing a large percentage of their total tank supply in the invasion of Ukraine. What's going to happen with the war in Ukraine? Time will tell, as it has been going on for this long, and they have had billions of dollars funded to them to try and defend and fight off the Russians. Are the Russians going to fold and give up? Or are they going to go tasty crazy on the Ukrainians? Time will tell.